Shalom. This is going to be a three-part video series on the Sabbath. I may do other videos pertaining to subjects pertaining to the Sabbath, but basically this series is going to compose of a introduction to the Sabbath. The second video is going to be in reference to, uh, who should be keeping the Sabbath. Is the Sabbath still relevant today? Is it applicable to everybody? How do we keep it, and so on and so forth. And then the third video is going to be a little bit of a deeper teaching as far as what is the Sabbath for. If people just tell you that the Sabbath is just basically a rest day, that we have the 6 work days and God gave us the 7th day to rest. Well, I wouldn't deny that the 7th day is for the purpose of resting, but that's not fully the full understanding of what the Sabbath is actually for. So the third teaching will be a very in-depth teaching, but this teaching is just basically, why is it that we keep the Sabbath when we keep it? Typically the 7th day right now, for many people, if you're in the United States and many other places in the world, you probably use what's considered the Gregorian calendar. That is the reoccurring 7-day-a-week cycle. You have 12 months, January through December, and so on. And so the question is the 7th day that is currently falling on the Gregorian calendar, as far as what would correspond to Saturday, is that the actual Sabbath? And the answer to the question would, before you actually answer that question, you have to kind of think to yourself, well, is there any way we could track the calendar all the way back to the creation? Well, of course not. There's not any way that we can do that. But what we can do is basically track the calendar all the way back to the Second Temple era. And the Second Temple era is the era in which, Yeshua, or Jesus, as many people knows him, would have come and basically, as we can see in the Brit Hadashah, or what's considered the New Testament, he's keeping the Sabbath. His disciples are keeping the Sabbath. The Jewish people are keeping the Sabbath. And so if we can figure out what Sabbath they were keeping, then we can conclude that this is the proper Sabbath to be keeping. And basically, it only takes a little bit of knowledge of the calendar, the current Gregorian calendar, and understanding what exactly changed when the when the Julian calendar became the Gregorian calendar, because the Julian calendar predates the coming of Messiah. It actually predates it by a few hundred years, and so that would have been the calendar in use, corresponding to the Jewish calendar, what's considered the biblical calendar. And so if we can basically conclude that what would have been Saturday for the Julian calendar 2,000 years ago, if that's still considered Saturday on the Gregorian calendar, then we have the same Sabbath day, basically. And the only difference between the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar is that in October of 1582, Pope Gregory basically had decided that the Julian calendar was insufficient because the spring equinox was moving too far away from Easter. And so what happened was, he decided that he was going to get some people to work on this and devise a new form of the calendar that would put Easter back where it's supposed to be, because it's as many people know, a lot of these different pagan festivals and so on and so forth were integrated into the Catholic Church, and they have to do with corresponding to the equinoxes and the solstices and all this kind of stuff. So he wanted to keep Easter where it belongs, and it was slowly sliding away because the Julian calendar was insufficient in that respect. I mean, granted, it took 1,500 years to figure it out, but in that 1,500-year period, it was about 10 to 11 days out of where it should have been. And so what happened was the people that he had, I'm just summarizing here, obviously, but the people that he had work on it basically came up with a form of what would be considered like a modified Julian calendar. And the only difference is this: most people are under the impression that we add a leap year once every 4 years, where we actually add an extra day um, to the year. But that's not entirely the case with the Gregorian calendar. That is the case with the Julian calendar. Every 4 years, you add a leap year, which adds another day to the year. With the Gregorian calendar, though, what they modified was, and I'm just going to put it out there for those of you that like math and so on and so forth. If you're not really into math or anything like that, don't worry about it. It's not that big a deal. But anyways, the difference is this. In a Julian calendar, you add the day every 4 years. In a Gregorian calendar, you add the day every 4 years unless the year is divisible by 100. If the year is divisible by 100, you don't add the day. Unless the year is divisible by 400. Then if it is divisible by 400, then that overrides the not adding the day for being divisible by 100, and you add a day. And so to put it into a real world example, say for instance like the year 1700. The year 1700 is divisible by 4. So you would add a day, you would think. But then you say, okay, well, no, it's divisible by 100 though, so it means that I don't add a day because it's divisible by 100, but it's not divisible by 400. The same with year 1800, the same with the year 1900. But when we come to the year 2000, the year 2000 basically is divisible by 4. And it's divisible by 100, so you would say, okay, we're not going to add the day, but it's divisible by 400, so that overrides that rule of not adding the day. So you basically add the day. So the year 1600, you would add a day. 1700, no. 1800, no. 1900, no. The year 2000, yes. And this keeps the calendar pretty much on track, the solar calendar, for being a completely solar calendar. The biblical calendar is actually a lunisolar calendar where you use different conjunctions of both the moon and the sun to keep your calendar straight. But the Gregorian calendar is strictly solar, so this is how they've devised a way to keep the calendar on track. And so basically, then, did this change the day of the week, though? That's the whole big question. And in 1582, when Pope Gregory decided to modify the calendar and devise the Gregorian calendar, he decided to go ahead and set the calendar straight at the same time. So basically what happened was on October 4th, 1582, which was a Thursday, you went to bed that night. When you woke up on Friday morning, it was October 15th, 1582. So they adjusted the calendar by 10 days. But the point is, though, when you went to sleep on Thursday night, you still woke up on Friday. So even though they adjusted the calendar by 10 days and devised a little bit different system as far as when to add leap years and so on and so forth at the turn of the centuries, the simple fact of the matter is you still went to bed on Thursday and woke up on Friday. The reoccurring 7-day-a-week cycle was not changed or broken. And so because of that, even though there was a Julian calendar in effect in the Second Temple era, which concluded in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed, that calendar had the same reoccurring 7-day-a-week cycle all the way into what we currently have as the Gregorian calendar. So yes, the Sabbath still is falling on the same day, at least as it was in the Second Temple era. And so that is the correct day for us to be keeping the seventh day weekly Sabbath, and so on and so forth. So, I hope this was a little introduction to why we keep the Sabbath on the day that we keep it, and I hope you found the information useful. And as always, thank you for your time.